സജീവമായി കുട്ടികളിലേക്ക് എത്തുന്ന രീതിയിലേക്ക് വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. കാരണം ഗോവിന്ദൻ നിസാർ മാസ്റ്ററെ ഭൗതിക ജീവിതത്തിൽ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ സ്വാധീനം ചെലുത്തിയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു എനിക്കറിയാം. നിസാർ മാസ്റ്ററിന്റെ ഒരു അധ്യാപനത്തിലും ഗുരുപരമ്പരയിലും കഷ്ടപ്പെടുന്ന ഏറ്റവും അടുത്ത ഒരാളാണ് ദേവിക എന്നുള്ളത് എനിക്ക് വ്യക്തിപരമായി അറിയാവുന്ന. ദേവിക അത്രമാത്രം സ്വാധീനിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു അധ്യാപനം കൂടിയാണ്. അപ്പം നിസാർ മാസ്റ്റർ വഴിയാവണം ഒരുപക്ഷെ സ്കൂളിൽ ഗോവിന്ദൻ ഇങ്ങനെ സജീവമായി കടന്നു വന്നിട്ടുള്ളത് ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ളത് എന്ന് ഞാൻ കരുതുകയാണ്. അതോടൊപ്പം ജയദേവികയെ ഇവിടെ പരിചയപ്പെടുത്തി. ജയദേവികയുടെ പുസ്തകങ്ങളെ ഒരു പുസ്തകങ്ങളെങ്കിലും വായിക്കാത്ത സാമൂഹ്യശാസ്ത്രം പഠിക്കുന്ന ആൾക്കാരുണ്ടാവില്ല എന്നാണ് എൻ്റെ വിശ്വാസം. സന്തപ്പെണ്ണുങ്ങളും പുരസ്ത്രീകളും സന്തപ്പെണ്ണുങ്ങളും ഉണ്ടാവുന്നത് എങ്ങനെ എന്നുള്ളത് ഏതാണ്ട് എല്ലാ ഇടങ്ങളിൽ പോകുമ്പോഴും അതൊരു നാടൻ പാട്ട് പോലെ ആക്കാൻ പറയുന്ന ഒരു പുസ്തകമാണ്. എല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാം. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു മേഖലയാണ് ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ടത്. പുരസ്ത്രീ ഇല്ലാതെ സന്തപ്പെണ്ണുകൾ അതൊക്കെ ഓൺലൈനിൽ ലഭ്യമാണ്. CBSE വെബ്സൈറ്റിലൊക്കെ ലഭ്യമാണ്. നിങ്ങൾ വായിക്കാത്തവരാണെങ്കിൽ അത് തീർച്ചയായും ആ പുസ്തകം എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ളത് തന്നെ സാമൂഹ്യശാസ്ത്രത്തിലേക്ക് ഇനീഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുക വരുന്ന കുട്ടികൾക്കൊരു സഹായം എന്ന രീതിയിൽ മലയാളത്തിൽ വളരെ ലളിതമായിട്ടുള്ള വാർത്തയിൽ എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ള ഇത് എന്നെ സ്വാധീനിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള മറ്റൊരു പുസ്തകം പറയുന്നത് ലോകം മാറുന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ രസകരമായ പുസ്തകമാണ്. നമ്മളെ തന്നെ ഒരുതരം റെവല്യൂഷണറി മോഡിലേക്ക് ആ പുസ്തകം അവസാനം എത്തിക്കുമ്പോൾ ഉണ്ടാവും. നമുക്ക് ഒരുമിട്ടാലെന്ന് തോന്നുന്ന തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരുപാട് പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കഥാപാത്രങ്ങൾ, ഒരുപാട് സ്കോളേഴ്സ്, നല്ല തൻ്റെയുള്ള സ്കോളേഴ്സ്, ബോൾഡ് സ്കോളേഴ്സ് പരിചയപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടുള്ള സ്കോളേഴ്സിന് മാത്രമല്ല വളരെയധികം സമൂഹത്തിൽ വളരെയധികം മാറ്റങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാക്കിയ ആക്ടിവിസ്റ്റുകളെ പരിചയപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടുള്ള അവരുടെ മുദ്രാവാക്യങ്ങൾ, അവരെടുത്തിട്ടുള്ള നിലപാടുകൾ, മൈ ബോഡി മൈ ബോഡി മൈ ബോഡി ഒക്കെ കണ്ടിട്ടുള്ള അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആണും പെണ്ണും തമ്മിലുള്ള ബന്ധം എന്താണെന്ന് ചോദിക്കുമ്പോൾ അതിൽ എവിടെ ആണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു ദേവി ഒരു സ്ഥലത്ത് അത് എഴുതുന്നത്. അതായത് പെണ്ണിനെ ആണ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ലൈക്ക് ബൈസൈക്കിൾ. ഈ ബൈസൈക്കിൾ എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഒരാണ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അങ്ങനെ പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് നേരിട്ട് ബന്ധമൊന്നുമില്ല. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ലൈക്ക് എത്തി അത്രയേ ഉള്ളൂ. അല്ലാത്ത ഈ പറയുന്ന തരത്തിലുള്ള ഇങ്ങനെ ഗുണമൂലമായിട്ടുള്ള ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ആയിട്ടുള്ള സ്ഥാപനത്തെ നിലനിർത്താനുള്ളതായിട്ടൊന്നും അല്ല എന്ന്. പിന്നെ നമ്മളെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് പലപ്പോഴും പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്ന ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ഒരു പുസ്തകമാണ് ജെൻഡറിംഗ് ഇൻഡിവിജ്വൽസ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ ദേവികയുടെ പുസ്തകം. ദേവിക ഇവിടുത്തെ ഫസ്റ്റ് PhD സ്കോളാണ്. അതാണ് മറ്റൊരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കാര്യം. സ്കൂൾ ഓഫ് സോഷ്യൽ സയൻസസ് പ്രൊഡ്യൂസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള ആദ്യത്തെ PhD എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ദേവികയാണ്. ജെൻഡറിംഗ് ഇൻഡിവിജ്വൽസ് എന്ന രീതിയിൽ പുസ്തകമായിട്ട് വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. അത് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് എപ്പോഴും ഒരു അഭിമാനം. പലപ്പോഴും പല സമയത്തായിട്ട് ദേവിക ഇത്തരം ഒരു പരിപാടിയിൽ ഇവിടെ വരാൻ വേണ്ടി ഞാൻ ശ്രമിച്ചിരുന്നു. പലപ്പോഴും വരും എന്ന് പറയും. പല കാരണങ്ങൾക്കൊന്നും വരാൻ സാധിച്ചിട്ടില്ല. കോവിഡ് സമയത്ത് ഞാൻ ഓർക്കുന്നു ഒരു സെഷൻ നമ്മുടെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി ഓൺലൈനിൽ ദേവിക പറഞ്ഞു ഫെമിനിസം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു വളരെ നല്ല രീതിയിൽ അത് അവതരിപ്പിക്കുകയും അപ്പൊ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് അന്നത്തെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വളരെയധികം വലിയ മാറ്റം ഉണ്ടാവുകയും അവരെ പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ വായിക്കുകയും ചിന്തകളോട് ഇടപെടുകയും ചിന്ത എങ്ങനെയാണ് തലയിൽ താലോചിച്ച് കൊണ്ടുപോകുന്നത് എന്നതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് വളരെ പ്രകടമായിട്ട്. പിന്നെ ഞങ്ങൾ പഠിപ്പിക്കാറുള്ളത് എസ്തെറ്റിക് വിമൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് കൊളോണിയൽ കേരളയെ പറ്റി പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്ന മോഡേണൈസേഷൻ സ്റ്റഡീസൊക്കെ പല അതായത് എൻ്റെ ക്ലാസ്സുകളിൽ ഞാൻ ദേവികയുടെ പഠനങ്ങൾ മിക്കതും കുട്ടികൾ വായിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി കൊടുക്കാം. കാരണം ഞാൻ എന്തെങ്കിലും സാമൂഹ്യശാസ്ത്രത്തിൽ സാങ്കല്പികമായി എന്തെങ്കിലും പഠിക്കുകയോ സിദ്ധാന്തപരമായി എന്തെങ്കിലും മനസ്സിലാക്കുകയോ ഒക്കെ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ഞാൻ സെന്റർ ഫോർ ഡെവലപ്മെന്റ് സ്റ്റഡീസിൽ പോവുകയും അവിടെ വെച്ച് ദേവികയെ കാണുകയും ദേവികയുടെ ടീച്ചറായി മാറുകയും ചെയ്തതിൻ്റെ കൂടെ കാരണം. അങ്ങനെയാണ് ഞാൻ ദേവികയിലൂടെയും ഇവിടെ വന്നതിന് ശേഷം നിസാർ മാസ്റ്ററിലൊക്കെ ആയിട്ട് ഈ സ്കൂളിനോട് അങ്ങനെ അതിൻ്റെ കോഹറൻസിൽ നിന്ന് പോകുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ വളരെ നിർണായകമാണ് ആ അർത്ഥത്തിലുള്ള നമുക്ക് ടീച്ചർ എന്ന രീതിയിൽ നമ്മളെ ഇനീഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ടതാണ്. പലപ്പോഴും വളരെ പിന്നോക്കമായിട്ടുള്ള പശ്ചാത്തലത്തിൽ നിന്ന് വളരെ ദുർബലമായിട്ടുള്ള സാമൂഹിക പശ്ചാത്തലത്തിൽ വരുന്ന കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി അവിടെ ഫൈറ്റ് ചെയ്യാനും ഞങ്ങളെ കൂടെ ഞാൻ സെൻട്രൽ ഡെവലപ്മെന്റ് സ്റ്റഡീസിലായപ്പോൾ അവിടെ റിസർവേഷൻ സമരം റിസർവേഷൻ ഇല്ല, റിസർവേഷൻ നടത്തിയാണ് SC ST OBC മൈനോറിറ്റി അന്ന് ഞങ്ങൾ സമരം നടത്തുന്നത്. ഞങ്ങൾ സമരത്തിൻ്റെ കൂടെ ആകെ 3 അധ്യാപകർ മാത്രമേ അതിനു വേണ്ടി കൂടെ നിന്നിട്ടുള്ളൂ. ഞങ്ങളിപ്പോഴും ഓർക്കുന്നത് ഞങ്ങളൊരു സിഗ്നേച്ചർ ക്യാമ്പയിൻ നടത്തി അതിൽ ഏറ്റവും ആദ്യം അതിൽ ഞങ്ങൾ കൂടെ നിന്നത് ജയദേവിയാണ്. അങ്ങനെ വളരെ വളരെ സജീവമായി മനുഷ്യന്റെ ജീവിതത്തിൽ ഇടപെടുകയും അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ അക്കാദമികമായി യാതൊരു തരത്തിലുള്ള വിട്ടുവീഴ്ചയും തയ്യാറാവാതെ അങ്ങനെ റിജറസ് അക്കാദമിക്സ് അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ മനുഷ്യന്റെ നീളുന്ന പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ, നീതിയുടെ നിഷേധത്തിന്റെ പ്രശ്നങ്ങളിലൊക്കെ സജീവമായി ഇടപെടുകയും ഒക്കെ ചെയ്യുന്ന നമുക്ക് കിട്ടാവുന്ന അപൂർവം ചില ആൾക്കാർ ബോൾഡായ അക്കാദമിക്സ്. സന്ദേഹം എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്നതല്ല വാക്ക് ശരിയല്ല. അതുകൊണ്ട് ബോൾഡായിട്ടുള്ള എന്ത് തുറന്നു പറയാൻ പറ്റുന്ന ആരോടും ഭരണകൂടത്തോടും ഒന്നും പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കാതെ ശക്തമായി നമ്മുടെ നിലപാട് നമ്മുടെ ആലോചനയുടെ ഭാഗമായി നമ്മുടെ കൺവിക്ഷന്റെ ഭാഗമായി പറയുകയും അതിനുവേണ്ടി പ്രവർത്തിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന അക്കാഡമിക്സ് വളരെ കുറവാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഈ ഒരു പ്രസൻസ്, ഈ ഒരു സാന്നിധ്യം, ഈ ഒരു ടോക്ക് വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ടതായി ആണ് സ്കൂൾ ഓഫ് സോഷ്യൽ സയൻസസിന് ബോധ്യം. ഇനി എം ഗോവിന്ദന്റെ ഒരു കവിത, അതായത് ചരിത്രത്തെ പറ്റി ഒരു കവിത എഴുതി. ആ കവിത എഴുതിയതിനു ശേഷം ഞാൻ ഈ പ്രബന്ധം അവതരിപ്പിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി കുഞ്ഞായിരുന്ന കാലത്ത്, ചരിത്രം എന്നാണ് കവിത എഴുതിയത്. കുഞ്ഞായിരുന്ന കാലത്ത് ഞഞ്ഞം പിഞ്ഞും പറഞ്ഞു, കുറച്ചുകൂടി വളർന്നപ്പോൾ പുതക്കങ്ങൾ കൂടി, മുറപ്പടി വളർന്നപ്പോൾ മുരുടൻ മട്ട് തുടർന്നു, മുതിർന്ന ഒരാളായപ്പോൾ ഒലിപ്പെരുത്തിയിൽ ഒന്നു. ഈ നാടും ഈ നാട്ടുകാരും, ഈ നാട് ഭരിക്കുന്നവരും, ഭരിക്കുന്നവരെ ഭരിക്കുന്നവരും, മരിക്കുന്നവരെ ജീവിക്കുന്നവരും, മരിച്ചു ഭരിക്കുന്നവരും, ഭജിച്ചു ഭരിക്കുന്നവരും, അവരും ഇവരും ഇടതും വലതും മുതുകിഴവനായപ്പോൾ പതുക്കെ ഞഞ്ഞം പിഞ്ഞം. ഇത് ഇത്രയും പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് ഗോവിന്ദ് മെമ്മോറിയൽ ലെക്ചർ 2024 അവതരിപ്പിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി ഏറ്റവും സ്നേഹത്തോടെ
സത്യം പറഞ്ഞാൽ എനിക്ക് അങ്ങനെ തോന്നാൻ കാരണം ഞാനിവിടെ പണ്ട് പഠിച്ചിരുന്ന ഒരാളായതുകൊണ്ടല്ല. I must confess that when I was a student here in the 90s, it did not feel like home for me at all. This place is truly some of the most painful memories in my own life. പക്ഷേ ഇപ്പൊ പറഞ്ഞത് സത്യമാണ്. ഇത് ഹോം കമ്മിങ്ങിനെ കുറിച്ച് ഓർമ്മയില്ലേ? അതിന്റെ കാരണം എൻ്റെ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾ ഇവിടെയുള്ള എന്താണ് അവരുടെ സ്നേഹമാണ്. എനിക്കിപ്പോൾ സോഷ്യൽ സയൻസ് ഫീൽഡായിട്ട് എൻ്റെ ഫീൽഡായിട്ട് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നുണ്ട്. എൻ്റെ സഹപാഠിയായിരുന്ന ദിനേശൻ അതിൽ ഞാനും ശില്പ എൻ്റെ ഗവേഷണ വിദ്യാർത്ഥിയായിരുന്നു. ഗ്രാജുവേഷൻ ഗവേഷണ വിദ്യാർത്ഥിയായിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ ഗ്രാജുവേഷൻ ആണെങ്കിൽ എന്തായാലും അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ വീടാകാൻ കാരണങ്ങൾ പലതാണ്. നമ്മളൊരു വീട്ടിൽ ജനിച്ചു എന്ന് വെച്ച് ആ വീട് നമ്മുടെ കാരണമില്ല. പക്ഷേ മറ്റു പല കാരണങ്ങൾ കൊണ്ട് ഒരു പക്ഷേ ആ വീട് നമ്മുടെ സാധാരണയിലുള്ള അനുഭവ സാക്ഷ്യമാണ് എന്നാണ് എനിക്ക് തുടർന്ന് പറയാൻ ഉള്ളത്. മാത്രമല്ല ഇന്നത്തെ ഈ പ്രഭാഷണത്തിന്റെ വിഷയം തന്നെ ചെറിയ കുടുംബങ്ങളെ പറ്റി വീട്ടിലേക്ക് മടങ്ങുക എന്നുള്ളത് എപ്പോഴും സന്തോഷകരമായ സമീപകാല അനുഭവങ്ങൾ നമ്മോട് പറഞ്ഞു തരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ മറ്റു തരത്തിൽ ആ വീടിനെ മാറ്റി പണിതാൽ ഒരുപക്ഷെ അത് വളരെ സന്തോഷകരമാണ് എന്നുള്ളതിൻ്റെ ഒരു മുൻനിര പോലെയായി ഇപ്പോഴേയും രാജേഷിൻ്റെയും ചെറിയ അഭിപ്രായപ്പെടുത്താൻ അവരോട് എനിക്ക് നന്ദി. ഗോവിന്ദൻ സ്മാരക പ്രഭാഷണത്തിൽ എന്നെ ക്ഷണിച്ച് ഈ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റിന് എൻ്റെ നന്ദി. ഈ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞില്ല ഇത് വീടായിരുന്നില്ല, പിന്നെ എന്തായിരുന്നു എന്നതാണ്. നമ്മെ രൂപപ്പെടുത്തുന്നതിൽ, നമ്മെ മനുഷ്യരാക്കി തീർക്കുന്നതിൽ, ചിന്താശക്തിയുള്ളവരാക്കി തീർക്കുന്നതിൽ വീടിനല്ല, വീട് പോലെ സ്വച്ഛമായ ഒരു ഇടത്തിന് അല്ല ഒരുപക്ഷെ പ്രവർത്തനം. ഇപ്പോൾ കഠിനമായ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ തരുന്ന, വേദന തരുന്ന ഒരു സ്ഥലമായിരിക്കും നമ്മൾ കൂടുതൽ ശക്തമായ രീതിയിൽ രൂപപ്പെടുത്തുക. അതാണ് എനിക്ക് അതും എൻ്റെ അനുഭവ സാക്ഷി തന്നെയാണ്. അതികഠിനമായ വേദനാജനകമായ അനുഭവങ്ങളിലൂടെ കടന്നു പോകുമ്പോഴും തലയുയർത്തി ഒരു ഡിഗ്നിഫൈഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഭൗതിക ജീവിതം നയിക്കാൻ വേണ്ട കരുക്കൾ എൻ്റെ മനസ്സിൽ ഉണ്ടാക്കി തന്ന അധ്യാപകർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന സ്ഥലമാണിത്. ഇവിടെ പലരെയും എനിക്ക് ഓർക്കാനുണ്ട്, മറ്റു മുരളീധരനെ ഓർക്കാറുണ്ട്. ഇതെല്ലാം അഭിപ്രായ വ്യത്യാസങ്ങൾക്കിടയിലും ഭൗതികമായ വളർച്ചയെ മാനിക്കാൻ തയ്യാറുള്ള ഒരാളെന്നുള്ളത് എനിക്ക് ഡോക്ടർ നിസാമയുടെ കാര്യം രാജേഷ് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞു. ഡോക്ടർ എം കരുണാകരൻ, അതായത് അദ്ദേഹം ഇവിടുത്തെ ഫാക്ടറി മെമ്പർ ആയിരുന്നില്ല, പക്ഷെ വളരെ വളരെ ക്ലോസ് ആയിട്ട് ഈ സ്ഥാപനവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടിരുന്ന ഒരാളാണ് ഡോക്ടർ എം കരുണാകരൻ. എം ഗോവിന്ദൻ്റെ സഹകാരിയായിരുന്നു. അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ സാന്നിധ്യം ഇതൊക്കെ തന്നെ എനിക്ക് ഈ പറയുന്ന പോലെ സ്വതന്ത്രമായി ചിന്തിക്കാനും ആത്മവിശ്വാസത്തോടു കൂടി നിലപാടുകൾ എടുക്കാനും ഒക്കെയുള്ള ശക്തി, ആത്മധൈര്യം നൽകി എന്നുള്ളത് പക്കമറ്റ വസ്തുതയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ എംഗോവിനെ കുറിച്ച് നമ്മൾ സ്മരിക്കേണ്ടത് എന്തുകൊണ്ടെന്നുള്ളത്, ആ സ്മരണ ആരിലൂടെ ഇവിടെ വന്നു എന്നുള്ളതിനേക്കാൾ എന്തിനാണ് സ്കൂൾ ഓഫ് സോഷ്യൽ സയൻസിന് അത്തരം ഒരു ചിന്തകനെ നമ്മൾ അതുപോലൊരു ചിന്തകനെ നമ്മൾ ഓർക്കേണ്ടത് എന്നുള്ള ഒരു പക്ഷെ ആലോചിക്കേണ്ട കാര്യമാണ്. ഒന്ന്, ഒരു ചിന്തകൻ എന്ന നിലയ്ക്ക് ജ്ഞാനത്തിന്റെ അതിർവരമ്പുകളെ നിരന്തരം അങ്ങോട്ടും ഇങ്ങോട്ടും കടന്ന് മാത്രം ചിന്തിച്ച ഒരാളാണ് ഗോവിന്ദൻ. അദ്ദേഹം തത്വചിന്തയും ചരിത്രവും സാഹിത്യവും കലയും രാഷ്ട്രീയവും എല്ലാം പരസ്പരം എങ്ങനെ ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് കിടക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള ആഴമേറിയ ഉൾക്കാഴ്ച മലയാളികൾക്ക് തന്ന ഒരു ചിന്തകനാണ് ഗോവിന്ദൻ. അത് തന്നെയാണ് സ്കൂൾ ഓഫ് സോഷ്യൽ സയൻസസിന്റെ ഒരു സ്പിരിച്വൽ. നമ്മളിവിടെ ഇന്റർഡിസിപ്ലിനാരിറ്റിയെ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത് ഈ ചില ഒരു റെസിപ്പി മാതിരിയല്ല. അതായത് കുറച്ച് സോഷ്യോളജി ചേർക്കുക, അല്പം ചരിത്രം ചേർക്കുക, കുറച്ച് രാഷ്ട്രീയ തത്വചിന്ത ചേർക്കുക, പിന്നെ മേൽപ്പൊടിയായിട്ട് കുറച്ച് ആന്ത്രോപോളജി കൂടി ചേർക്കുക, എല്ലാം കൂടി കലക്കിയെടുത്ത് ഒന്ന് അല്പം പാകം ചെയ്താൽ ഇന്റർഡിസിപ്ലിനറി എന്ന തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു ആഡിറ്റീവ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു മനസ്സിലാക്കലല്ല അതേപ്പറ്റി ഇവിടെ ഉള്ളത്. മറിച്ച് നിങ്ങൾ ഏത് വസ്തുവിനെ കുറിച്ചാണോ പഠിക്കുന്നത് ആ വസ്തു സങ്കീർണതയുള്ള ഒരു വസ്തുവാണെന്ന് തിരിച്ചറിയുക. അതായത് ഒരു സങ്കീർണമായ വസ്തുവിന് പല വശങ്ങളുണ്ടാകും. ആ പല വശങ്ങളും ഒരു സാമൂഹ്യ വശമുണ്ടാവും, ഒരു സാമ്പത്തിക വശമുണ്ടാവും, ഒരു സാംസ്കാരിക വശമുണ്ടാവും, ഈ പറയുന്ന പോലെ ചിലപ്പോൾ ഒരു മനഃശാസ്ത്രപരമായ വശമുണ്ടാവും. അങ്ങനെ പലതരം പല വശങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാവും, നിർബന്ധമായിട്ടും ഉണ്ടാവും. ഒരു പ്രതിഭാസവും വെറും കേവലം സാമൂഹ്യമോ സാമ്പത്തികമോ മനഃശാസ്ത്രപരമോ ഒന്നുമല്ല. അപ്പോ ആ വസ്തുവിനെ അതിന്റെ സമഗ്രതയിൽ മനസ്സിലാക്കണമെങ്കിൽ ഈ വശങ്ങൾ തമ്മിലുള്ള ബന്ധം എങ്ങനെ ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് കിടക്കുന്നു എന്ന് മനസ്സിലാക്കുകയാണ് വേണ്ടത്. അതാണ് ഇന്റർ ഡിസിപ്ലിനാരിറ്റിയുടെ ഒരു സാധനം. ഈ ഒരു ഉൾക്കാഴ്ച എനിക്ക് ആ ഈ ഉൾക്കാഴ്ചയെ വികസിപ്പിക്കാൻ എന്നെ അനുവദിച്ച ഒരു ഇടമാണ് സോഷ്യൽ സയൻസ്. അത് ആ പ്രാധാന്യമാണ് ഈ സ്ഥലത്തിന് എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം ഉള്ളത്. അത് എനിക്ക് വീടിന്റെ തണലും സ്നേഹവും നൽകിയില്ല. ചില സമയത്ത് എന്നെ പുറന്തള്ളി എന്നുള്ളതൊന്നും എനിക്ക് എന്നൊരു വിഷമമേ അല്ല. അതല്ല ഒരു പൊതുസ്ഥാപനങ്ങൾ നിനക്കത് കുടുംബത്തിന്റെ അകത്ത് നമുക്ക് കിട്ടുന്ന എഫക്റ്റ് ഒന്നും ഇവിടെ കിട്ടിയില്ലെങ്കിലും കുഴപ്പമൊന്നുമില്ല. നിങ്ങളുടെ ജീവിതത്തിൽ എങ്ങനെ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് നിങ്ങളുടെ ചിന്താശക്തിയോ വർദ്ധിപ്പിക്കുന്നു, നിങ്ങളുടെ മുന്നിൽ ഒരു വെല്ലുവിളിയായിട്ട് നിൽക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത് തന്നെയാണ് അതിൻ്റെ വില. More about that later. ഞാൻ വിഷയത്തിലേക്ക് കടക്കാം. So, English, I hope that's all right. You must have noticed that this title, I don't know, some of you must have read Robin Gentry's book. This title is actually a spoof in that book. The title of that book is Politics, Women and Well-Being. The title of this lecture is Family, Women and Well-Being. So, in a sense, Robin Gentry was presenting a very well-known formula, quite central to the Kerala model discourse, which is, if I put it formulaically, it is politics plus women is equal to well-being. In a sense, that is very central to the Kerala model, understanding that the family is not just a democratizing, socialistic, social democratic politics that we need. But women, in a sense, women are central, and the hidden term there is actually family. But anyway, so I'm trying to pull that veil off that kind of discourse. So, but why study family now? Because I can tell you why. Because from the 1990s at least, we have been seeing a certain heightened anxiety about the fate of the Malayali family. In the 1990s, people were talking about how globalization and rising consumerism and rising individualism, where all of this was affecting the Malayali family badly, Malayali family values. And this indeed account the family referred to is, of course, the heterosexual extended nuclear family or the standalone nuclear family, and assumed to be the primary source of affective connection and empathetic values. So the whole idea is that if the family collapses, there will be no more empathy in society, there will be no more sources of affect. It is also valued as a primary disciplinary institution, both shaping and sheltering modern subjects. So the fundamentally, it is supposed to produce disciplined, hardworking, industrious subjects for for society, for modern society. It is also assumed to be the essential source of welfare for the individual, in the sense that if you are in trouble, or if you are unwell or in need of some support, the primary source of that support should come from the family. So the destruction of the family would mean the destruction of that kind of support as well. So therefore we have statistics now that show that, leave the family aside, but marriage definitely seems to be in crisis in Kerala. There's a rising number of divorces since the 1990s. Reports of domestic violence have definitely risen after the domestic violence legislation. All of this is regarded with worry by both the state as well as patriarchal authorities. We know that the centrality of marriage to women's social ambition is still very strong in Kerala, especially among the low middle class and the underprivileged groups. And except for a very small segment of highly educated women who are now able to resist the pressure to get married a little more, the rest of us are all clearly facing the prospect of being denied social ambitions if we do not get married. And that's the situation of very low employment prospects for women in Kerala exacerbates that. Why do you have to get married? Essentially, partly because there is no guarantee that you will get a job, for women particularly, if you pass out of higher education. So, state feminism, if you look at it, state feminism in Kerala since the 1990s, which you will find in a whole bunch of women's empowerment initiatives by the government of Kerala since the 1990s, even these have not touched the centrality of marriage and family for women. Our welfare system continues to offer what is called marriage assistance to the daughters of poorer families through what is called Mangalya Padhati. Almost every department has a Mangalya Padhati going on. The fears of the decline of the family family because women are getting uninterested in marriage, however, are now starting to be getting voted. I heard about something, this was a big talk, it was a big discussion on social media some time back. I don't know, I can't vouch for the quality of that research, but some research apparently interviewed a whole bunch of young educated women in various colleges, and all of them told him that they are not interested in marriage. They would resist it. So he portrayed it as a huge crisis, and he immediately appealed to various patriarchal authorities that they should come and do something. And we know that it only shows how the anxiety, the continuing anxiety about the family in the present. And of course, the critical feminist presence in Kerala has also left this anxiety pretty much unimpaired. Yet there is good reason to get past the ideological cobwebs secreted by the different segments of civil society and state agencies that establish the inevitability or necessity of the family. We need to ask questions about the structural roles that the family plays in contemporary Kerala, not only in terms of reproducing gender inequalities, but also economic inequalities in this case. You know that we are living in a time when the Gini coefficient is actually literally going through the roof. You know, the inequalities are breaking are stratospheric in contemporary Kerala, the rates at which it is increasing. So what role does the family play in that? What effects does it have on social life in Kerala? These are critical questions that we need to ask as a way of getting past these ideological cobwebs which kind of waylay us at every turn. Especially young women are waylaid at every turn. I'm sure you've been to, none of you have missed this thing of going to a marriage and being questioned about, oh, when are you getting married? Why are you not getting married? Etc. etc. I'm sure all of you must have faced it at one point or the other. Oh, you don't worry, you face it enough. You haven't yet. The dowry marriage in Kerala, as you know, is ubiquitous and highly disempowering, especially in the context of high female unemployment. Very high levels of domestic violence and worse, the endorsement of domestic violence, as evident in the National Family Health Surveys, is rampant in Kerala. Then children, for example, and then you turn around and say, okay, all this is terrible, but the more families offer safety for children. Now, there is an alarming amount of evidence that shows that families may not be very safe for children. Thinking about sexual violence, I mean, sexual violence seems to be more and more reported from families, not outside families. Yeah, but then interestingly, we always think, if you look at the cases where sexual violence against children have been discussed, it's mostly about outsiders entering the family or kidnapping the child or doing something to the child. Only very rarely that we hear about cases and we discuss with a lot of public outrage when it happens in the family. And more importantly, while sexual harassment of children is, sexual abuse of children is really somehow touches all of us, the terrible kinds of beatings and other kinds of corporeal punishment and psychological repression of children. And remember, this is a society where we are rapidly individuating. Now, a child now who is around 8 years old is probably more individuated than an adult than a 19-year-old was 10 years back. So remember, this kind of repressive teachings, etc., are happening against that kind of a child. So the consequences are even more worse. So we don't really pay much attention to that kind of child abuse. We are very interested, we are very worried about sexual abuse. So then there's enough research that shows that women enjoy very little part in marriage, even when employed. So if you look at the research on women who are seeking maintenance or divorce in family courts, there is ample evidence that show that women suffer from an immense amount of asset loss. Loss of assets, not just income, disposable income, but actually assets at marriage and at divorce. And interestingly, unlike in places like the US, women have no claim to property acquired after marriage. You can only ask for maintenance. In the US and in many other places, if you file for divorce, the family property is develop exactly how. Here you can't claim that, you can only claim maintenance. Meanwhile, the responsibility for family life continues to fall very, very heavily on women. I have a whole book now, which will be out hopefully end of the year, on this, on looking at lower middle class and underprivileged families and what the increasing burden of social reproduction on women of these groups is doing to them. So, well, I won't carry on about that because it's a lot. Maybe it's a question, if you have questions, I can address it then. Now, if you look at critical scholarship on inheritance and marriage and family in 20th century Kerala, actually it's not such a big scene. There is some amount of research, and much of it is historical and feminist. So you have the work of people like Sharadamani, G. Arunima, Pravina Kolo, among my contemporaries, among my contemporaries. And you have younger scholars like Sonia Thomas, whose work on slavery is very interesting, and others. And more recent sociological and anthropological research on childhood youth in Kerala, it also throws a lot of light on the shaping of the family in 20th century Kerala. Now, these have exposed the contradictions of what is the so-called Navothanam. As a term, I find extremely inaccurate and deeply ideological. One thing continues, speak of it as liberating in some unqualified sense, only if one turns a blind eye to the new forms of power that is engendered, especially in the institutions of the modern family and modern caste community. Yet these critics seem to have these feminist, historical, anthropological, social, academic critics of the family seem to have had no impact. And on welfare policy, particularly in Kerala, both the Malayali left as well as the right seem to have embraced the family of right. And that's not surprising because we know, we know that in the 20th century we did not really have socialism in Kerala, we had social democracy. And that is why people, social democrats like Govindan, were so interested in Kerala. Many of the left people who studied Kerala were not really communists. They were mostly social democrats. And it's not surprising because we know by now that of the centrality granted to the heteropatriarchal family in social democratic theory. So if you've read the works of people like Karl Polanyi, I think you must really encourage students to read Polanyi. So if you read Polanyi, it's very clear that the conservatively defined family, community and land for him are a bulwark against an accelerating capitalism. And this was characteristic of communist / social democratic thinking in Kerala too in the 20th century. And not surprising then that the literature on the Kerala model achievements has rarely raised a critique of the family in Kerala and indeed continues to place much hope on the heteropatriarchal family as the heart of beating heart of state welfare in Kerala. So you have to. So this is where our trans people find themselves at a crisis. Unless you are able to claim family status, membership in a family, it's very difficult for you to claim welfare. And even if you do claim, there is always the social stigma of someone who is claiming welfare without deserving it, because you don't have babies to take care of or old people to take care of. Not surprising, again, is the fact that it was never questioned in the 1990s when social democracy in Kerala moved slightly towards neoliberal governmentality. Once again, it became this very center, the beating heart of neoliberal welfarism in Kerala, and that's why you have the name Kudumbashri. Kudumbam is very much there, the heart of it. And so even feminist activism in Kerala will not risk being the bad name of being a Kudumbam collective. So in fact, in our book, a forthcoming book, the title of the lecture is a forthcoming book, which I co-wrote with Anamika Ajay, who's also a social researcher from in Kerala, about Kerala. We call it a Kudumbam collective critique of Malayalam. That's what we appropriated that term. I think in Kudumbam collective not that at all. We are unapologetic, and we can discuss that during the question. And so I'm here trying to strip off the quasi-natural benign aura that continues to highlight and protect the idealized Malayali family, that conceals both its shaping by different rationalities of power in the 20th century. So that's a history that has not been explored. And also the violence involved. So when you're talking about family as a natural institution, as a benign institution, somehow all its sins are forgiven. You would not forgive such a sin if it happens in a public institution. Right? So if you get beaten up in school or social science, you will take it lightly. If you get beaten up at home, you try and many of us don't want to talk about it. So, Malayali feminist historians have exposed new relations of marriage and family that led to women's disempowerment and domestic confinement, particularly the emergence of dowry and its impact on female inheritance. But they have not explained well enough the implicit persistence of the possibility of violence against women in the family. It's not as if there's violence is happening against women in every family, but somehow women are, you all kind of implicitly, tacitly accept that women are more likely to get it, or women are, and if women get beaten, well, it's a bad thing, but something you kind of really expect. Something like that. We don't put a finger on it still, how we justify that. So that is to say, if the modern woman whose innate capacity, now this is the ideal of modern woman that came up in the early 20th century, which I spent 8 whole years in School of Social Sciences trying to clarify. The modern woman whose innate capacities are well developed through education and socialization is now viewed as a full-fledged agent of domestic power, shaping subjects and managing materials and guarding souls in the modern family. I mean, that is a promise that was offered to women in the early 20th century within the discourses of social reform. So now, if that is the case, how come there is so much tolerance of domestic violence, especially by the husband and his family towards her? If the woman enjoys so much power in the family as a guardian of souls and manager of materials and shaping subjects, who made a big disciplinarian, gentle disciplinarian in the family. She is so important to the family, how come she can still reach? And everybody tells you not to, even big reformers tell you to keep quiet as much as possible. Speak about, and I tell you, even, I know, again, nobody wants to be put collecting, even when you know that the woman is being beaten by blue. Now, existing feminist scholarship, including my scholarship, including mine, which I carried, the research that I carried out in the School of Social Sciences, does not explain this, does not give you much insight into this. I think for this, we need a Foucauldian history of the present, which is a kind of historical inquiry that picks up a puzzle of problems from the present, and then tries to trace the history of the displacements and repurposings and conflicts and struggles and all that, which shape these problems. And I think it would reveal the complexity and finer detail of the intertwining of multiple forces and institutions that gave rise, which is of course the beginning of an understanding. So if you want to tackle a puzzle, a problem, then you need to know where all it comes from, what are its sources and how those sources are tangled up with each other. Then you can untangle and point to some kind of solution or the other. Now, Foucault's own insights into the nature of the family as a power-laden institution are crucial here. In fact, he tends to view the family as the seat of sovereign, not disciplinary power. So this is interesting. He has argued that disciplinary power was grafted onto the family, and in his famous 1973 lecture on sovereign power, he argues that the family preserves the essential schema of sovereignty, that is domination, membership, bonds of sovereignty, bonds of suzerainty, blood ties, etc. So it may well be the case in the modern Malayali family also. Now, secondly, existing feminist scholarship rarely deals with the coming of the modern family among the assetless and socially oppressed sections of the Malayali. Now, this is a great failure to my early work. And part of the reason was at that point we had a rather superficial kind of idea that it is not appropriate for scholars with privileged caste, oppressive caste origins to explore the histories of those who belong to the oppressed communities. It was not considered appropriate. Now, that was a point is yes. The only thing was that the oppressive caste origin scholar should not try to speak for. It's a different thing to explore the structures of power that actually shape the institutions among modern institutions among oppressed communities. That's one thing. It's another thing to speak for it. So at that point, as a young scholar, I would have been. I'm sure Dr. Nizar Ahmed would have grown in despair if I said that, because my dissertation is already like nearly crossing 400 pages. So he cut out a chapter, two chapters, one actually written chapter and one imagined chapter, both were cut out, because he just thought that the examiners are going to collapse reading all this. But then I think that was a failure, I still feel, well, I should have done that. Or at least I did flag it in my conclusion as a failure, which I hope some other person will take up and fulfill. So that's all I could do at that point, and I'm trying to make up for that. And sad, I must also say that I'm really sad at how many years I submitted my dissertation here in 1998. I became book in 2007. But I am sorry that that gap remains largely unfulfilled after all these years. My hope was that young people will come up and do it. But I hope your generation will take up that challenge. So anyway, I want for the rest of this lecture to present an account of the shifting rationalities of power in Malayalam-speaking regions in the 19th and 20th centuries, the imagination of the modern Malayali families, and this actualization, how that actualization is reflected in these new rationalities, and how they really came out. But as far as the oppressed caste, working class family is concerned, the wonderful exception to what I just told you is the work, of course, of Anna Devika. So my understanding of Brahminical patriarchy in modern Kerala derives from her description of the process of indigenization of the Malayali woman worker. But that's another lecture. I can speak about Brahminical patriarchy in 21st century Kerala, but lecture and another chapter in my book. So I will not touch on that unless you have questions. So my claim, briefly put, is that the historical trajectories of the new age, that is the communities that actually benefited hugely from the social transformation of the 20th century, I call them the new elite communities. So I believe that the families in the new elite community and the experience of women in them were radically different from the experience of women in non-elite Malayali families in the course of the 20th century. And this might look like a self-evident claim until you actually start probing into the consequences of it. It's not a simple claim. Yeah, it is. If you just remain at the superficial level, I think it's self-evident, and what more? What more is really the challenge there? You probe, and I'm hoping to give you some idea of what might be at stake in probing this difference. So I believe that these forms of privilege have been informed very differently by sovereign and disciplinary and governmental powers, all three kinds of power that Foucault describes. So, to start, let's start with very briefly referring to the transformation of political power in mid-19th century in most of the Malayalam-speaking regions. You know that most of these regions came under British domination. All these regions actually came under British domination in the 19th century. So, with the consolidation of British power, here of course political power was very different in the pre-British times. Like Sudipta Kaviraj and others point out, you have caste practice disciplinary social conduct without a frequent direct recourse to state power. And political power was kind of distributed in layers of authority. It did not rest in an absolutist state, unlike in the West. So once the British authority was established in Kerala, in other parts of India, in many other parts of India, there was some effort to set up replicas of European states or because of this social and political peculiarity pre-existing in Kerala. So the colonial state could not be absolutist by any chance. Rather, it claimed that it would not be responsible for everything in a vast and complex society. So aspects of social conduct which did not affect the state were gradually called tradition and protected from reform. So this allowed Indians to claim social autonomy from political colonialism. So it seemed that the Indian caste elite could continue to exercise a sphere of subsidiary quasi-sovereignty over society, while political sovereignty was to rest entirely with the British. Now, if you want to see an example for this, you only have to look at 19th century Travancore. Now you know that in modern Travancore, the king of Travancore, what Martanda do? He essentially engaged in an extremely modern maneuver by conquering the principalities around him. So concentrating power in the monarchy of Travancore, but in a very smart modern move, actually shifting it to the deity of the Sri Padmanabha temple, saying that the real king, his sovereignty would rest with Sri Padmanabha, and he was only a servant. And you know something, there is actually a little wakalam where this is the man saying it's a very modern bureaucratic move, where he actually signs away his kingdom to Sri Padmanabha and accepts his prime ministership. Very smart, modern, and so modernity is actually is the 18th century. We should start doing thinking that way. So anyway, so this was not a face. Remember, this was not a face by the British. But who challenged it? Anyone? But there was a challenge in the 19th century, a huge challenge, and that challenge actually came from below. It came from the Ayya Vaikuntha Swami cult, the Ayyavari cult, which challenged the authority of the Travancore king, called him Anantapuri Neejan. The evil force of Anantapuri. And of course the Chanar women, the other group which challenged him were the Chanar women, not the men, remember. The Chanar women who fought for the upper class. Remember, they were not really asking for the blouse because they were modest and nice ladies who wanted to cover themselves and sit in a corner. Rather, they basically wanted the blouse, yes, but they all, because they were good Christians maybe, but they wanted above all the upper cloth, which would make them equal in social terms with buyers. So these are the two important challenges and very severe challenges that the Travancore monarchy faced in the early 20th century. And how did it try to refurbish its own power, its damaged social sovereignty? It tried to turn itself into a modern state or a modern state. In fact, Travancore projected itself as the modern state of British India. And by extending modern governmental power So you can, by in 19th century, you can see that the Travancore monarchy is moving in the direction of freeing up property rights, encouraging modern enterprise, extending education and healthcare, even opening up public spaces cautiously. That is, public kacheris were set up where any citizen could go, any subject, irrespective of caste. And therefore, public kacheris had to be located far away from major temples. Now try doing that kind of an exercise. Please go to every town in Travancore. This is a good exercise, good kind of project that the students here could do. Go and look at the location of state kacheris in Travancore, Cochin, and see where they are located. Also try and compare it for Malabar, because Malabar had a very different trajectory, Might be good. But then what we know is from government orders is that it should not be near any major temple. Why? Because the Travancore monarchy is also the guardian of the caste. Janma Bhedam, order of caste. Anyway, so the long and short of it is that the sovereignty of Travancore and anchored in the Sri Padmanabha was not, and the preservation of the caste order was not eradicated. Rather, it continued in a tempered form by new governmental part of the Travancore state as British colonialism extended. Now, in this model, the abjected castes were offered a limited visibility in the eyes of the state, so they could, attend the schools set up by missionaries and so on. Modern schools and hospitals open to them without disturbing the advantages enjoyed by the caste elite. So it's interesting that when the missionary schools spread and more lower caste people young students went to these schools, the privileged castes in Kerala were very worried that they will not get government jobs without modern education. So it was their complaints that actually led to the setting up of government schools in Kerala. And that is why government schools in Kerala, at least in very recent times, were dominated by upper caste, at least in the 1960s. Now, however, being a Hindu state that antedated colonialism, Travancore and Kochi also possessed the authority to introduce the reforms that affected skin allowances and resource distribution among the higher caste groups, unlike in the British case. Now, when Britishers tried to change marriage and family laws and tried to, for example, protect children, through raising the age of marriage, etc., there was a storm. The upper caste in Bengal raised a storm against them. In Kerala, Kerala in general, and Travancore, Kochi in particular, it was not an issue because the sovereign power of regulating caste was anyway with the state. So, it's never really settling down its responsibility to protect the caste order. These native states became amenable to the pressure of newly educated sections of upper caste people to reform marriage, inheritance, family, and so on. And so, this was because there's a lot of literature on the kind of pressure behind social reform. Mostly on the lines of Victorian neo-Brahminical Indian family. That's what all the social reformers talked about, especially the elite social reformers talked about, based on patrilineal succession and compulsory heterosexuality and the idea of sexual complementarity. Now, the educated new elite, which sought to reform their caste into modern communities, swore by the disciplinary power of the woman as the chief instrument of shaping subjects adequate to it. So I've written reams and reams on this already, so I'm not going to go a lot into that. What I did not write at that point was about the deployment, a different implicit deployment of sovereign power within the projected modern community, and which rested on the power of the father and patriarchal community leadership. So this was through shared claims of shared blood or common historical origins. So if you look at the writings in the early 20th century by the leaders and the modern caste community organizations, you will see that they're all talking about how this caste had an ancient origin. They were like wonderful in the past, and then they all declined, or they came from somewhere and then they declined, and so on. And so and we know that these castes were actually a whole bunch of fragmented groups, which were kind of linked together by very specific kinds of practice. Now, it was these basically modern community formation in Kerala aimed at bringing together all these fragments and creating modern communities from them. And this ancient past, this claim regarding the ancient past, or a shared journey across time, or common blood, led to the firming up of endogamy. So in modern communities in Kerala together are fanatically endogamous. You can marry only within your community of blood. So we are so bloody modern. How come we are so obsessed with marrying in our caste? Now that is where the deployment of sovereign power is evident. So modern families of particular new elite caste communities were not just disciplinary institutions. They were also the carriers of pure blood across generations. Pure blood in, scare words. Endogamy became central to each. Almost all languages of progressive social change, from the missionaries to community reformers, were agreed that sovereign power in the new form family, that is, the refurbished authority of the father, was necessary, and that it was the indisputable, if invisible, grounds of the modern family. And in turn, the exercise of disciplinary power based on this foundation. Don't remember that if the mother is allowed to be the gentle disciplinarian in a family, she must first accept the implicit sovereign power of the father. Only then she can claim that power. Based on foundation was agreed to be crucial to entrenching the state's governmental power over individuals. So if you look at the Diwan Madhava Rao's very interesting book from the late 19th century called Bala Bhyasanathapati. The English title is different. The Malayalam translation is Bala Bhyasanathapati, where he's teaching Malayalis to raise children, how to raise good, productive, industrious children. He very clearly said, first there has to be a father who's like a stable ground, who will control things, but not with violence, like it is in traditional families. In traditional families, the Karnava is a feared character. The oldest male terrifies everybody else into submission. Unlike that, this father has to stay in the background. He must exercise power, but it must be very gentle. It must be strong, but not coercive. Later, this power of exercising gentle power is granted to modern educated women. So, of course, what happens is, because British laws, because the power of life and death, of course, is central to any political sovereignty. So, because the British were political sovereigns, no more could caste sovereignty kill, really kill. Of course, they could kill outside the law. But technically, in terms of colonial law, killing someone because they had broken a caste boundary, etc., was not allowed. That was a crime, technically. In practice, in real terms, this could happen, and then, of course, like it happens now, it can be covered up in so many different ways. And of course, because all these officials, etc., were very much part of the caste hierarchy, they would collude to cover up those crimes. So that's another matter, but technically speaking, this was a crime. So, so hypogamous, for example, hypogamous exogamy, that is, marrying someone who was lower, for a woman, marrying someone who was lower in social status, would result in death, sure death, in earlier times. But now, there would be no death, but definitely modern communities would lead the woman into social ostracism. and of course denial of inheritance and so on. So new notions of partiality, of the woman's devotion of chastity come to fore in this period. So, for example, this idea of first night never existed in Kerala, except among the Brahmins. They had there was a particular name, Shanti Muhurtam, for the consummation of the wedding. But that was limited to the Brahmins. But otherwise, this idea of first night was an act that could be performed by Brahmins or by God or whatever. Anyway, it didn't matter at all. But now that changes. The woman's body becomes, a particular kind of resource that is transferred to the husband's family, and it is acted upon. Your body is acted upon by sovereign power of blood. So in Kerala, the average age of female sterilization now is around 26, 27. Imagine at the age of 26, 27, you have two babies and your tubes are cut. Now, if you want to have a child with another man, it's going to be difficult. Because it's very difficult to prepare a tubectomy. Vasectomy is very simple and can be reversed very easily. But in Kerala, every year you have lakhs of tubectomy, but hundreds of vasectomy. So what does it mean? That means that your body, if you're married, is passed on to, and it comes under, whether you know it or not, it comes under the sovereign authority of another man and his family. It is meant to reproduce his genetic pool, his blood. We say genetic pool, but at that point it's pure blood. And still, the possibility of you having another partner and maybe wanting to have a child with another partner is like, what? Not something nice, is it? You might get ostracized if you try any of that, even now. So, right. So then this is control over, and this also means control over the woman's property. So then, after the Nayak bill, when the matrilineal families were divided, most of the property, the women of course inherited, got their share. All of it was understood that men will control that share of property. So you see, sovereign power is very much alive. It may not be talking big. It's not like the old times when you heard stories in Ambudri families where the calcified woman was killed with a single blow of a killing and thrown into some bushes, or murdered, or murdered because she fell in love with a man. All these stories we have heard of. So this is like you might do that because on the British there might be consequences. And in the 20th century, definitely with more democratization, lower caste people asserting themselves with greater democratization, this might actually become a serious issue. So you don't have killings anymore. I mean, less the number of killings. We don't know actually how many killings happen. We don't know, but anyway, not many reported at least of this kind. Less the number reported at least. Instead, you have the father as the implicit power holder, sovereign power holder in the family, who will come into the fore only when some breach happens. And then the sovereign power of maybe expunging the family and expelling a woman who does not, who seems to be not able to keep the blood going. All that happened. So, and remember, endogamy was actively fought for. So, Nambudiri reform movement, which we all idealize as some, I hope they don't do it anymore. And when I was a student, they were still idealizing it. So, I have a whole damn chapter on it. So I feel deprived because I don't know why now when I think back of it, a lot of young people are asking, why did you pay so much attention to a Nambudiri reform movement? Nambudiri are hardly like 3 or 4% of the Malayali population. So why did you think? I said, this Nambudiri reform movement is sitting on my head. Like, literally telling all of us that it was the ideal reform movement. So I had to take it apart. So I had to devote a whole chapter of that thesis. Anyway, so that is a moment where they fought for endogamy. They wanted endogamy. They wanted to end their existing exogamous practices and bring in endogamy. So, So the modern woman's mind was to be developed as a resource for the everyday disciplining of modern families. And on training women to accept both the role of the gentle disciplinarian and her subservience to the refurbished sovereign power is actually quite evident. If you reread the famous novels of the late 19th century, the eponymous heroines, in Devika, Vasumati, they are not just claiming for themselves this space of the agent, the disciplinary agent. They are also saying that, promising to stay within the bounds of sovereignty. So you have Indulekha saying that she will not fall in love with any man who she cannot have. And what determines who she can have? Definitely this caste. And also modern women writing at that point, many of the women whose work I have put up on a site called Swadharani, they are actually claiming to be the agents of this non-coercive disciplinary power central to both community, but they are also saying that they don't want liberal freedoms. They don't want to be walking in parks or dancing, all the good things that we badly want in our generation. They don't want the freedom to choose their partners. They don't want freedom to choose their partners in the sense that choose them out, go beyond the boundaries of the caste. They don't want to be eating in public places. So many things they don't want. They only want to be disciplined, sovereign, disciplinarian. So this new sovereign power that inherent in modern community was bolstered by patriarchs. So if you think about it, what kept this community going? So you have a patriarchal power over women's life decisions, as I told you. That is negative in nature and preventing exogamy. And what is the other side of it? The other side is the economic incentives to men as dowry. So which is positive in nature and preventing exogamy by men. So men find it more advantageous to marry into the community because the prospect of dowry is there. To marry outside the community means that you might lose that opportunity. Now, so by sacrificing liberal freedom, ceding their bodies to the family and community and becoming the agent of governmental power, this is the new Kulina. This is the new Kulina, that is, in the Sanskritic typology, you have basically Kulina, Nritya, and Vesha. That's how women are divided. Vesha doesn't mean modern prostitute. It means the vessel of culture, the woman who provides his pleasure to the upper caste male. That's the Kulina, new Kulina, therefore is like an agent of governmental power, and she keeps within the boundaries drawn by sovereign power in community and family, and she could claim a place, however secondary, within the community, share the gains and the powers of her new age community. That's really what she gains from it. And such a family, and remember, this family is an interesting family, this modern family. It bore a very heavy new responsibility of supporting itself through enterprise and gainful labor. So the state and community might offer support, but ultimately the welfare of an individual is assumed to be their family's responsibility. And in Kerala, from the mid-20th century onwards, there is no move, if you will notice, to democratize the family even indirectly, the new age family. So all social reform comes to end by the 1950s. Why? Have you thought about it? It's because of this, because you have this form just crystallized. And I even claim that there is an implicit social contract in Kerala between patriarchal authorities of the new elite communities and the state about women's socially acceptable roles, public roles. So you find that there are no efforts to extend liberal freedom, and even in work, when women the kind of work women can do is shaped by these concepts. Have you ever wondered why nurses in Kerala, where and are treated so badly? Because nursing, as you know, is an important profession. It is very central to our claims of being, a healthcare provider to the masses, etc. And it was already very central in the 1950s. How come the state never bothered to improve their service conditions, pay them better, try to fight the stigma? Why? I would say that this is evidence that there is an implicit pact between the state, the modernizing state, and the communities, the big communities, the elite communities in Kerala. Because why? Nursing is a profession that requires a woman to cross community boundaries on a daily basis and compromise her bodily purity by touching the body of strangers. And she has to travel every day that distance and return home. It's a daily thing. So there is a way in which this has been made as difficult as possible. So what did Malayali nurses do? They were very smart. They started running away in the 1950s. They went abroad. So Malayali woman was no fool. So that's another matter. The post-independence, post-independence, if you look at it, in fact, this is recorded in the work of social scientists. The new elite women steadily lose property. So the property owned by women in Kerala is actually much less, even if you compare it with many other places. Many other places is supposed to be less socially developed. Now, and you actually see, in fact, what happens at the end of the 20th century is a big break. That is, in the mid-1950s, 1980s, higher education institutions begin to spread all over Kerala. And this leads to a large number of young women entering college. Now that's the single most revolutionary thing. Very silently happened in the 1980s and after. Now this is, so what? So you had the 1990s came, liberalization, globalization and media explosion, the chance for young women to go and study outside Kerala. A lot of different things just opened all at once. No wonder they were all worried about what will happen to the family, etc. But, what happens is, this is happening. So you have young women who are individuated, who are making their mark in almost every field, but very little employment. Now, basic condition for any feminist revolution anywhere in the world is that women enter the labor market in large numbers. That's not happening here. So what we have is an atmosphere that is like bursting with gender tension. Women, at the age of the angry young woman is upon us. And these women are questioning everything. But the wherewithal that they need, the material support that they need to break free is almost non-existent. So that is really defines, and that is really the crisis of the modern family. And after the new millennium, you have more and more Muslim young men, Dalit young men in colleges, in public spaces, interacting with more and more women of all kinds of communities. And one of the important reasons why suddenly love jihad popped up in 2007, you don't have to search a lot for that. So the crisis of modern family in these privileged communities is essentially the crisis of patriarchal power in it. So I'm just rephrasing it. Now, I told you, this is only half the story. The other half is about the coming of the family as an institution among Kerala's oppressed caste communities. So, in Cornwall, you know that the proposition of such a family was offered to them essentially by the missionaries in the 19th century. That's when it happened first. And however, these were communities which were denied resources, or even people like Iyengar fought very hard in the Travancore State Council. The actual material resources that he could secure were not great, and whatever was secured was also later taken away by Nair officials, etc. So these communities were denied resources, and so modern community formation was not really prolific among them. It was much present, definitely, a number of efforts, but it did not really, become these groups grew into powerful groups, powerful blocks, like the Iravas or the Nayars. The Iravas, of course, are an exception, and they should be discussed separately. But the Nayars or the Namboodiris or the Syrian Christians, etc., or the elite Muslims, etc., they had a different trajectory altogether of having a lot of resources with which to build communities and the new family and so on. So, and in fact, it's not at all easy to direct the oppressed caste women into domestic confinement and modern wifehood or motherhood, because modern wifehood and motherhood involves staying at home and not really making an income, basically looking after, basically offering care work, doing for care work, unpaid care work. Now, it was not easy for women of the oppressed communities to do this because they labored for survival. So then, sociologists also noted, despite the fact that the discourse of the modern family actually proliferated quite a bit through in the oppressed communities, through the oppressed caste communities, through their social reform, actualization of such a family was actually quite delayed, and this is confirmed not only by the sociologists who were researching the oppressed caste family in the 1960s, but like Sharada Mani and many others, George and others, but also by historians like Anna Lindbergh, who actually studied the family among the cashew workers of Kerala in the 1950s onwards. So they had no assets, nothing to give as dowry. So the extent to which the modern family rested on the availability of assets, that's quite evident because these are not families which had any assets. They were mobilized as agricultural and industrial workers from the 1930s by the left in Kerala, by the communists. And the communists also highlighted the sexual oppression of women workers by elites. It was a key theme in their politics. And this was part of the demeaning caste order by which any oppressed caste woman could be turned into a sexual chattel. And this was contested and challenged by the communists. It was one of the great victories in Kerala. But this did not actually move towards anything other than conjugal bond. So this woman was rescued from the elite, from the sexual oppression of feudal elites, was to be moved into a conjugal marital arrangement. Now, women workers also now, remember, these were all women workers. They were actually in Kerala in all the traditional industries in agriculture. Vast number of workers, vast majority of workers were female. But they did not possess any strong public identities, as Lindbergh so clearly shows. They were rarely in leadership, not just Lindbergh, but also people like Vida Velayudin who were studying the mobilization of women in the 1930s and 40s, who say this. They are rarely in leadership, represented mostly as women and children, or mothers and children. In the photographs of the massive militant cashew workers strikes of the 1950s, it's actually the women who are striking, but they don't have crutches, etc., so they carry the kids or kids and so on. So they are immediately identified as mothers and children. And again, in the 1930s, governmental care towards workers, that is through the Travancore Factory Act, etc., is supposed to be for the welfare of the working class, effectively effeminized these women by identifying them as mothers responsible for the family rather than workers in their own right. So the Travancore Factory Act of 1939 prohibited women from working long hours and night shifts to give them, I quote, sufficient time to attend domestic duties, not for rest, not even for safety. It's for basically doing housework. A whole set of wage fixation committees from the 1940s to the 80s reduced wages for women workers, or all women were identified as deserving only a lesser wage because they were supposed to be secondary workers, while the men, their husbands, were supposed to be primary male breadwinners. So they were supposed to get an additional component to their wage, the family wage, which made them get a higher wage. You will find that across the traditional industry. So you tell me, why should a woman, and these workplaces, agree that the left will do a lot to democratize these workplaces. But the labor was extremely heavy, the exploitation levels were very high, the feudal harassment had gone away, but had not disappeared. Neither were the leaders of the left completely free of feudal ideas of what a woman is obliged to do for them, lower caste woman is obliged to do for them, etc. So why should any woman want to stay there? So the second generation, the first generation of these women who gained all these benefits chose to marry off their daughters with dowry to fellows who don't drink. That was the bottom line. They wanted husbands who would take care of their wives. So staying at home seemed like a better option being a non-working housewife protected by a steady earner, the husband who would actually earn some good money as male breadwinner, that seemed like a better option than slaving away in a factory where you still kind of, your blood is basically drawn out for some capitalist somewhere to make a profit. So that was the logic of these women. So so then by the 1980s, you actually see a huge fall in opportunities, employment and opportunities to women workers, because our agricultural sector contracted after 1975. Traditional industries like oil, cashew, etc. began the down collapse, which is at a peak now. The collapse has really reached a nadir now. So that happened, and that starts in the 1980s with women being thrown out of work. Tile factories closed. For example, in Kerala, in Kollam, my hometown, at that time when I was in college, I remember cashew factories were in crisis. So a lot of women were doing cashew work, etc. Some of them would come to town and work part-time as domestic workers. So we moved into informal sector work. Tile factories were closing, so all the women who worked in the tile factories were out looking for domestic work. So entering into domestic work, informalized, low paid, low skilled, stigmatized work, I call the new Vidya. So this is modern caste. This is caste, Brahmanical patriarchy, the modern patriarchy created the new Kulina in the 1930s and 40s. It created the new Vidya in the 1980s. And and also don't imagine the women workers were confined to home. Okay, they decided to give up work and stay at home and be taken care of the husbands, etc. That did not bring them the social prestige of the Kulina. Rather, there were bodies to be acted upon by governmental power of the state, especially family planning. So this seems to answer the question. Now there is one big puzzle in family planning studies in Kerala is that how is it that until 1975 you had men coming forward for vasectomy in large numbers? So the people who agreed to do family planning were all men. They came forward for vasectomy. After the mid-1970s, you see a huge reverse trend. That is, men don't come. And one important reason for that is the terror unleashed by the emergency, where a lot of men were forcibly sterilized. So that terror is an important thing. Secondly, the technology of family planning also changes, and the focus falls more on women than on men. Again, these two factors notwithstanding, I would still argue that this is a time when women are beginning to be thrown out of the labor market in Kerala from traditional industries. And this is probably an effect of this feminization as well. So women's bodies are no longer perceived as laboring for an income outside. So male bodies are supposed to be laboring. So if you remember all this talk about how family planning can actually reduce your energy, your ability to labor, and such people. Here's the rampant in Kerala in the 1970s. So if the woman is not working anymore, she might as well undergo that, rather than the man who has to go and engage in hard physical labor every day. So it would be an effect of that feminization. And the assetless workers became asset poor families in the 1970s with the land reforms. So title deeds were given mostly to men. 10 cents of land were given to the working class poor, and all the title deeds were in male names. And so now working class men were promoted to the lowest rungs of the bourgeois property ownership, and women became their dependents. So this logic you can see was followed through even in the agricultural pensions given starting 1980. So Leela Gulati's important work on agricultural workers' pension shows that male workers were more likely to get their pensions. That we identified. Though, as I told you, women workers were a huge majority of agricultural labor anyway. And then you can see in the 1980s, so there's a real crisis because the women are out of work, the men are still protected, but the women are out of work and they are struggling. Now in the 1990s, you have a very very context to widen inequality. And the reason for that is that the remittances from the Gulf now flow into Kerala hugely. Liberalization, one of the effects of liberalization was that people who were abroad, working abroad, could send large quantities of money to Kerala. So you can see that wages were high in Kerala, they're still high in Kerala, but wages, remember, the depreciated value. But the families which had members working in the Gulf who could send money here were able to acquire assets, the value of which depreciated less. So, Swarna, I think pala bhoomi vaangittu, veedu vekkunu, adinte vela athra pettannu idilla. പക്ഷേ നമുക്ക് കിട്ടുന്ന കൂലി വലിയ കൂലിയായിരിക്കും, 1000 രൂപ 800 രൂപ ഉണ്ടാവും. പക്ഷേ 6 മാസം കഴിയുമ്പോൾ അതിന്റെ വില ഭയങ്കരമായി ഇടിക്കും. So you see, that is how social inequality is actually widened in Kerala. So in this context, you see, and also Kerala became a highly migration dependent society. So the whole aim of social reproduction changed. So if in the 1980s or 1970s, the aim of social reproduction was still to produce labor power for the local capitalism. Now, the aim of social reproduction became producing labor for global job markets, which is far more expensive. It requires a great more effective labor on the part of women. Women have to focus on children, make sure that they go to tuition, make sure that they don't have a mental breakdown, watch every little bit of their time so that they get into to pass entrance exams, they get into technical education, etc., etc. So the very nature of social reproduction changes, and this becomes a huge challenge for the less privileged families. Also, in the 1990s, education and healthcare both get out of the social, are moved by the government from the social sector to the commercial sector, which means that all of it costs a bunch. Self-financing education is very expensive, not affordable to the poor. Remember, this coincides with the coming of the Kudumbashree, with cheap credit. So Kudumbashree offers cheap credit to the poor. Now, without Kudumbashree, there would have been a social collapse at that point. Now, I'm not saying Kudumbashree is great for that reason. I'm just saying historically, it kind of shows up the poor family, at a point when it would have actually collapsed. Under the fact, because men's employment, the employment of men also begins to dwindle in the late 1990s, when groups of workers from other states are coming here, are being brought here for the kind of labor that Malayali men were not willing to do anymore. So you can see that even men, the family wage earning regular earner is disappearing. And so the responsibility of even finding an income begins to fall on the woman all the more. And Kudumbashree is the perfect solution. You don't have to get out of the house. Essentially, you don't have to go and become a demeaning worker. You can stay in the house. You can be a government-like school leader. And that's how the low middle class, working class family is kind of held up. So I'm going to stop here. I'm talking on and on. So in conclusion, I'm trying to argue that the crisis of the family in these two different groups of people, the privileged elite on the one hand and the caste of this working class, is very different. So, among the poor, the crisis is definitely of an economic nature. So, debt is becoming a terrible burden. So, debt among and I have some fieldwork on this. So, and the huge weight of the debt is borne essentially by, and we being middle class young ladies, all happy in our feminist clubs, we don't really look at what is happening to the working class women. We really don't care that they are drowning